Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I was listening to some of the excerpts from Davos yesterday, and President Trump said of President Xi, he's for China, I'm for the US, otherwise we love each other. And I think overall the market is too negative. This is an entente cordiale, and it suits both sides at this time. Trump wants a bit of momentum going into the election, and Xi has a soft economy, and we're seeing further spillover effects from this virus, and he probably wants to underpin it as well. 23rd of December, when I was reflecting on the end of the year, I said a complex, non-linear and interdependent world where feedback loops can start spinning at dizzying speed. And to wit, apartment blocks in Shanghai are seen being sprayed with disinfectant powder after a local resident was reportedly infected with the coronavirus. This is a video. Mike Smith AFR video was posted by a friend and has not been officially verified. Some of the key updates from China's press briefing that just wrapped up in Beijing on the coronavirus. This is from David Inglis. Reuters, how a virus impacts the economy and markets. A paper by Yonghua Lee and Warwick McKibben estimated the global economic loss due to SARS at $40 billion in 2003. What scared people about SARS is the mortality rates, said ING Asia's chief economist Robert Carnell. In a more extreme version, because Liberia is such a small economy, you see Liberia GDP in this graph versus the death rate during the Ebola crisis. And I wrote about that Ebola crisis in 2014. And I said it's all about escape velocity. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. It is a numbers game. The more cases you have, the more likely there are going to be mutations that could change the virus in a significant way. The more it persists, the more likely we're going to be thrown a curve. Dr. Tedros, the WHO Director General, will convene an emergency committee on the novel coronavirus under the international health regulations. Cases have been found in other places out of Wuhan, indicating the epidemic is expanding. Concerns are mounting. This is Hugh. It is inevitable that people will cut their trips during Spring Festival and holiday consumption will be hit. Andreas Steno asks, should we be scared of the coronavirus market reaction? We took a look at markets around the outbreaks of SARS, bird and swine flu. ADXY on average kept rising, S&P 500 lost momentum, Treasury yields dropped 2 out of 3 times, and there was no contagion effect, he says, on the Australian dollar, which is currently at a 6-week low. Predicting the future is now more complex than the computer simulations which revealed how galaxies grew over eons, I wrote at the end of the year. I was quoting Dominic Cummings, who said our world is based on extremely complex, non-linear, interdependent networks, physical, mental, social. Properties emerge from feedback between vast numbers of interactions. For example, the war of ant colonies, the immune system's defenses, market prices, abstract thoughts, all emerge from the interaction of millions of individual agents. Interdependence, feedback, and non-linearity mean that systems are fragile. and vulnerable to non-linear shocks. Big things come from small beginnings and problems cascade. They come not single spies, but in battalions. And I think that references this moment with respect to this virus. So it's a fluid situation. And as I said, it's all about the exponential non-linear ability of these viruses to spread. And at the moment, we're at the beginning of the curve. It could just peter out, or it could just accelerate off the charts. Home Thought's mathematics is the language in which God has written the universe, Galileo Galilei, via Professor Feynman, and that took me back to Rumi. We come spinning out of nothingness, scattering stars like dust. If horsetail fall in Yosemite National Park is flowing in February and the weather conditions are just right, the setting sun illuminates the waterfall, making it glow orange and red. This footage is by Beth Pratt. Political reflections. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, accompanied by the Earl and Countess of Wessex and the Princess Royal, hosted a reception on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen on the occasion of the Africa Summit. Donald Trump turns the Davos business elite into some sort of teenagers waiting to attend a pop concert half an hour to go, and already a very long queue stretching the main lobby of the World Economic Forum venue. I think he used it more as an opportunity and a platform to speak back to the US. Recent media reports that suggest the kingdom is behind a hacking of Mr. Jeff Bezos' phone are absurd. We call for an investigation on these claims so that we can have all the facts out. That's the Saudi embassy in the US, and this is the allegation that the Saudi Crown Prince effectively hacked Jeff Bezos' phone. December 2018, I was writing about a truce dinner in Buenos Aires on the occasion of the G20, when Trump and Xi Jinping and their advisors had dinner and then broke out into spontaneous applause thereafter. And it was at that very moment of the dinner that Canadian authorities were making the arrest of Wanzhou Meng, the chief financial officer of Huawei Technologies, at the request of US authorities. At the time, China said Canada will face grave consequences if it does not immediately release Meng Wanzhou. Well, the court case has begun. And then it's quite interesting. I'm interested to know if anyone recognizes these protesters from outside a Vancouver extradition hearing today. And sometimes the propaganda effort, I don't know whether it's by design or by accident, is quite amateurish, and this is a good example of that. Iranian lawmaker Hamid tells parliament that Tehran would be protected from threats if it had nuclear weapons. That's ISNA via Delta One. And this I touched on in the case of Kim, and I said, what security guarantees can Trump provide to Kim? Read Khamenei. Offering up bulletproof security guarantees is the equivalent of threading the needle. And I was talking about Kim Jong-un then, said he can hardly forget what happened to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. And therefore, you know, to this Iranian lawmaker Hamzeh's point, he is entirely accurate. Iran doesn't have a deterrence. Swiss police suspect Davos plumbers of being Russian spies. You can't make this up. And I wrote about Russia, but in the context of Africa, from Russia with love, and I thought to myself, these plumbers are from Russia with love as well. In a plot twist on whether he tried to surveil then US Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, Giuliani said, "No, I did not. In fact, she directed the surveillance of me." Our house is still on fire, Greta Thunberg tells world and economic leaders at Davos. She's spoken about this feedback loop and the risks of dieback, where we enter a phase of cascading system collapse before, she said, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We're in the beginning of a mass extinction. November 2015, I said, I cannot help feeling we're like frogs in boiling water. We have created massive interference in the cosmic fine-tuning phenomenon. Trump takes aim at what he calls alarmists, saying the world must reject those who predict doom and the apocalypse, which is kind of ironic because it was precisely his predictions of doom and the apocalypse that I think won him the election. There is certainly, I'd written last year, fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. But I said the conundrum for those who want to bet on the end of the world is this: what would be the point? The world would have ended. The Trump administration is planning to expand travel restrictions to 7 countries. Nations being considered for new rules are Belarus, Eritrea, Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, Nigeria, Sudan, and Tanzania. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro is at 110.82. Dollar index 97.626. Japanese yen 110.04. Swiss franc 0.9697. The pound 130.65. The Australian dollar 0.6841. India rupee 71.19, South Korean won 1164.62, the Rial 421.23, Egyptian pound 15.81, and the Rand is at 14.4636. No forecasts nor any assumptions in this chart showing the dollar index versus the yearly change in US dollar bank reserves. Dollar weakness is imminent if the correlation holds, and I think it will do. That's from Andreas Steiner, and I think the liquidity bomb that the Federal Reserve has dropped just short of $500 billion is the defining issue. Very strong jobs growth in 3 months to November, plus 208,000, most since January 2019. That's Bruce from Reuters. So UK rebounding a little bit. Euro dollar, as I said, 110.82. Netflix, the streaming giant, said it added 8.76 million paid subscribers globally, compared with expectations of 7.63 million. International growth helped the streaming video service trounce expectations in the last quarter of 2019. Company acknowledged competition had an impact in the United States, where growth missed Wall Street targets, and that competition will become more global as the Disney Plus service launches across Europe in March. Walt Disney and Apple, of course, are now fighting for streaming customers. Netflix said it expects to add 7 million subscribers globally in the first quarter, below analysts' average of 8.82 million, according to Refinitiv. They beat market expectations on EPS quite handsomely, but overall I remain very bullish about it. American analysts tend to be quite bearish, and I think that's because they have an international blind spot. Netflix is not a US business, it is a global business. And as I said in September last year, the majority of analysts are in the US, and in my opinion, these same analysts have an international blind spot. I put out a conviction buy when it was trading at $270. It's going to be volatile today, but essentially I'm expecting it to move higher this year and substantially. Commodity markets, interesting juncture for oil. If it breaks the trend, it should head back to 50. That's Raoul. That's when it was below 58 yesterday. Then we bounced, but we're back near 58 again. right now. Gold, 1552 and change. I don't see it falling away sharply this year. Some people think it's going to fall very sharply. Emerging markets, an update of Lebanon's crisis dashboard. Also added the parallel exchange rate to the monitor. It's bad, off the scale, bad, says Ziad M. Daoud. So, we've known about this. I've written about it in that article, The New Economy of Anger. Prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies, reducing opportunities and accelerate the negative feedback loop. Lebanon's public debt to GDP ratio of 160% suggests that investors should prepare for haircuts of 60 or 70%, Capital Economics Consultancy told the Financial Times. Badra punchline in an article headlined, India's Neighbourhood First Policy Crumbles. The curtain is coming down on India's leadership role as a regional power, even before the drama of the Asian century truly began, warns Ambassador M.K. Bhadrakumar. He references Sheikh Hasina, who has said, "We don't understand why the Indian government did it, CAA. It was not necessary." She said there is no reverse migration from India to Bangladesh, but she added within India, people are facing many problems. Then touching on Afghanistan in a comment by Hamid Karzai, all religions in Afghanistan, Muslim and Hindus and Sikhs, have suffered. The feeling in Afghanistan is very different to what the perception here in India may be. I hope that sentiment would be reflected in India as well with regard to other Afghans who are Muslim as well. In his characteristic way, Karzai hit the nail on the head, namely that CAA takes a differentiated approach towards Muslims. Such criticism does not arise out of misinformation about the CAA or because of the false alarms stemming out of the negative publicity generated by the anti-CAA protests in India, as apologists of the Indian establishment may interpret. The BJP ideologues don't get it that this is not about a failure of diplomacy. This is actually about deeply flawed statecraft. This will not be a mere tactical retreat. It is heading toward a strategic defeat. The point is, the curtain is coming down on India's leadership role as a regional power, even before the drama of the Asian century truly began. Can't you hear the catcalls from Gwadar to Hambantota to Chittagong to Curfew? Indeed, there is a fundamental contradiction here. Hindutva ideology and the government's neighbourhood first policy are simply irreconcilable. We can only overlook at great peril that Islam is the second largest religion in South Asia, with about 600 million Muslims, forming about 1/3 of South Asia's population. And essentially, I wrote about this separately, but on the 2nd of December, I said the politics of ethnocratic nationalism are a bust. Emerging market inflation hits near 6-year high. Rising food and fuel prices could halt rate cut cycle in its tracks. That's from Chigel. Sub-Saharan Africa, this La Libre piece on rigged Congo election has incredible revelations. Kabila used Zuma to convince Ramaphosa to accept false Tshisekedi victory. It's by Thomas Wilson. Rwanda's Kabarebe gave Kabila green light to approve rigged result. MONUSCO carried Kabila's messages to Fayulu. 7th of January last year, I wrote why DR Congo delayed election results. The article to which Thomas is referencing is on rich wrap-ups. And in my article of last year, I said it's not the people who vote that count. It's the people who count the votes. That was Stalin. My article over the weekend was the Maghreb a decade later, and I was talking about the intrusion of middle powers. And I said the Horn of Africa also exhibits entirely similar characteristics. In fact, from the Maghreb to the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, we're witnessing a surge in asymmetric warfare and the intrusion of middle powers. And Africa ACSS, the threat from African militant Islamist groups, is expanding and diversifying. Militant Islamist groups in Africa set a record pace of activity in 2019. There were 3,471 reported violent events linked to these groups in the past year, a 14% increase over the previous 12 months. This reflects a doubling of militant Islamist group activity in Africa from 2013, and then they go into it by geography, well worth having a look at, saying the picture has shifted to one that is more evenly dispersed across Somalia, the Lake Chad Basin and the Sahel, with lesser but persistent threats in North Africa and Mozambique. Each theatre faces unique dynamics. Ethiopia pushes privatization to give its economy a sugar rush. It's interviewing Erba, a grizzled 50-year-old father of 8. Sugarcane just isn't profitable anymore. Maybe time to start farming something else. Recently, he got news that could augur a return to better times. The government is planning to privatize Ethiopian sugar corps' assets, including a factory complex near Erba's home on a high plateau, a 2-hour drive southeast of Addis Ababa. Local investor aims to let farmers buy shares in the mills with promises of investment in additional projects such as candy and ethanol factories. Privatization of the sugar industry is part of a sweeping liberalization backed by Abiy Ahmed. The private sector is not playing its natural role, said Ayub Tekalin, a former diplomat and private equity executive hired by Abiy as State Minister for Finance. Our growth had shortcomings in terms of quality, job creation, inclusivity, and benefiting the poor. The government aims to raise at least $7.5 billion from selling assets from the sugar industry, the phone system, railroads, and other infrastructure. Ethiopia needs foreign exchange. Exports have dwindled. External debt has grown 26% since 2016 to $27 billion, more than a quarter of the country's likely 2020 GDP of roughly $100 billion. In December, the IMF and World Bank pledged more than $5 billion to help narrow the budget deficit and support Abiy's reform agenda. Next up will be assets of Ethio Telecom, which struggles to provide anything more than basic voice service in most of the country. Government plans to sell as much as 49% of the company and issue 2 mobile and broadband licenses to boost competition. France's Orange, South Africa's MTN, and Safaricom of Kenya have all expressed interest in licenses, which bidders estimate will fetch $1 billion, as well as another $1 billion plus to build out networks. With its growing economy and a population of 100 million on track to double by 2045, Ethiopia is the biggest prize left in Africa from a telecom's point of view, says Michael Joseph. After that would be Ethio Railway Corp, tracks, trains, stations, and especially the line that covers 466 miles from Addis Ababa across the border to the port of Djibouti. Also likely to be sold are assets of the electric utility, with more than a dozen hydro plants and a series of industrial parks built with yet more loans from China intended to turn agrarian Ethiopia into a manufacturing hub. One company not for sale is Ethiopian Airlines. Investors have been eyeing the airline, but the government says a sale is unnecessary. Founded in 2010 to foster economic growth, the company, then they're talking about Metals and Engineering Corp, a military-run conglomerate known as METEC, that until recently was at the center of Ethiopia's state-driven economic model. Founded in 2010 to foster economic growth, the company was given control of projects ranging from fertilizer, sugar plants, to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, Africa's largest hydropower project, which is 5 years behind schedule. METEC took on many projects, but it didn't have experienced employees. This pushed METEC to failure. Black market exchange rates for foreign currencies stand more than 30% above the official bank price as businesses and individuals fight over scarce resources to pay for imported goods and international travel. Ethiopia suffered from long-term chronic foreign exchange liquidity issues. Razia Khan, international loans could ease the cash crunch and deal with an important impediment to any privatization. The political situation is equally iffy, with Abiy facing widespread criticism for an authoritarian style and surrounding himself with loyalists. More than 200 people have been killed in demonstrations and ethnic clashes since July. This is a photograph of a sugarcane plantation. This is a photograph of Prime Minister Abiy and of the Ethiopian Railways car near Addis Ababa. 2nd of July 2018, after he'd been in power for 90 days, I wrote a bullish article about him, Ethiopia Rising. I said, he's been Prime Minister for 90 days, crisscrossed the country, ended a state of emergency, released thousands of political prisoners, thawed relations with Eritrea, bagged $1 billion from the UAE, announced a dramatic economic about-turn in matters of language and linguistics, tapped into a Nelson Mandela 1994 mood. And I said those 90 or so days represent the most consequential arrival of an African politician on the African stage since Mandela walked out of prison, blinking in the sunlight, and constructed his rainbow nation. And I was saying it was about speed and velocity. Virilio calls it dramology, the science or logic of speed. And it said in Virilio's case, he says, speed at which something happens may change its essential nature, and that which moves with speed quickly comes to dominate that which is slower. Whoever controls the territory possesses it. Possession of territory is not primarily about laws and contracts, but first and foremost a matter of movement and circulation. And I was describing Abiy as moving at lightning speed, and the old guard is like a traditional feudal fortified city, and basically he's moving at such speed they can't react to him. At the same time, he announced his economic pivot 90 days, and now this article on Business Week is telling us about what he's actually seeking to do. 14th of October, when he won the Nobel Prize, I did mention that he faces a fiendishly complicated task, fending off the centripetal forces which are tearing Ethiopia apart. At least 10 people killed after a seating area collapsed during a major Orthodox Christian celebration in Gondar. Reports from Uganda are that Omara Boni, an ally of Bobi Wine and People Power organizer, has been murdered. That's from Jeffrey Smith. Last year was the worst ever for blackouts in South Africa, surpassing 2015 to be the most prolonged, most intense, and most damaging to the economy, up to $8 billion in cost, according to a CSIR presentation via Joseph Cottrell. South African all shares up 1.56% year to date, dollar rand at 14.464. IMF program still up in the air as Egypt primes its economy. I think they'll definitely draw down on the IMF again. Government has won plaudits from international investors for enacting tough reforms, supported by a $12 billion IMF loan package that concluded in November. The three-year program focused on reviving the economy delivered the Middle East's fastest growth. The fund forecast will accelerate to 5.9% in 2020. Foreign direct investment already surged in the first quarter of the current fiscal year, rising 66% from a year earlier. As I said, this has been the destination of the world's best carried trade for more than 2 years. The Egyptian pound is at 1580. EGX 30 is down 2.31% year to date. Nigerian all shares up 9.76% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 1.3% year to date. Turkey plans to explore for oil in the Somalia seas, Erdogan says. Somalia passed a new petroleum law earlier this month to attract foreign investment. 15 offshore blocks are open for licensing. Turkey and Somalia ties deepening despite their terror attacks. Umut Kagrisari says this is a major political, social and economic event. Somalia and Turkey trade agreement. Turkey imports $43 billion worth of fossil fuel products. Turkish oil companies can set up offshore operations quickly. Somalia and Turkey potential maritime defense pact. So he's bullish about it. Man integrated. There's a reason I write about maritime issues. If Kenya and Somalia come to blows over their maritime boundaries, one unexpected knock-on effect could be a further strained NATO. UK and Norway are backing Somalia while the US and France is siding with Kenya. DW News, Kenya or Somalia, who owns the sea, what lies beneath? A narrow triangle off the coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean, about 100,000 square kilometers, is the bone of contention between neighboring Kenya and Somalia. For Kenya, the boundary is quite clear. It lies parallel to the line of latitude. That gives Kenya the largest share of the maritime area, and it has already sold mining licenses to international companies. But Somalia disagrees. The Somalis want the boundary to extend to the southeast as an extension of the land border. Man Integrated, 4 years ago, I was asked to run an analysis on small to medium-sized ports of opportunity in Africa. Hobyo in Somalia popped to the top of my list for a number of reasons. Number 2 was Berbera in Somaliland. Daily Nation had an article, Scramble for the Horn and the Red Sea Ports, saying the scramble has intensified. Foreign powers have established trade and military bases, ostensibly to secure safe shipping on the Bab el-Mandab waterway, have landed forces presumably to counter piracy and terrorism. However, their long-term aims are to monopolize strategic ports and hydrocarbons. I wrote about this in an article called The Indian Ocean Economy in a Port Race in August 2018. I said today from Massawa, Eritrea, admittedly on the Red Sea, to Djibouti, from Berbera to Mogadishu, from Lamu to Mombasa to Tanga to Bagamoyo to Dar es Salaam, through Beira and Maputo, all the way to Durban, and all points in between, we're witnessing a port race of sorts as everyone seeks to get a piece of the Indian Ocean port action. China, the BRI initiative, Gulf countries who now appear to see the Horn of Africa as their hinterland, Turkey's included, Japan and India to a lesser degree are all jostling for optimal geo-economic positioning. Joint statement by President Uhuru Kenyatta and Prime Minister Boris Johnson: from 2020 to 2025, we will work together across 5 pillars: mutual prosperity, security and stability, sustainable development, climate change and people-to-people reflecting the key challenges and opportunities of our time. Leading economic indicators from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics show electricity unit sales grew 2.3% compared to the year ended December 2018, and this is obviously probably the best leading indicator. From an 11.6% jump in 2015, growth in electricity sales slowed to 0.94% in 2016, followed by a 7.86% increase in the subsequent year. The pace then slowed to 2.96% in 2018. As a result of the low collection, cumulative ordinary, mainly tax revenue underperformed the target by 138.7 billion shillings in the half-year period to December. Amounted to 920.6 billion against a target of 1.06 billion. It's a pretty big shortfall. The economy is soft. Nairobi all shares down 0.27%. And the NSE 20 is up 0.18%. Thank you for listening.